Hello, and welcome to Economics and You. Last time, we answered the question, what do economists do? And we looked at their simplified models of the world that they use to describe what they see. This time, we are looking at economic systems as a whole. So let's see. Well, before we look at our economic systems, we first have to look at the three basic questions that all economists and all economies must answer. Now, an economic system is determined by these questions, and that is the way that a nation satisfies the wants and needs of its people. Now, nations create these economic systems based upon their answers to these questions of wants and needs. Now, the first question that an economy has to answer is what to produce. You see, we live in this world of scarcity where we only have a certain number of resources and we can only apply those toward certain goals. So we have to make bargains, we have to make negotiations, we have to make important choices as to how we spend those resources, because we can't, after all, have everything. So nations have to consider their wants and their needs when they're making their decisions about what it is they are going to produce with their resources. The second question that they have to answer is, how are they going to produce these goods? This is a question of, to what degree are we going to be using human labor and providing jobs and opportunities for people to work, and to what degree are we going to be using technology to do this? Whenever a nation is answering this question, they really have to ask themselves where they're going to derive the most benefit. For many nations, in many instances, what they're going to try to do is produce goods at the lowest possible cost, because they're competing with other nations in a global market. But other factors do sometimes come into this decision. And so nations will sometimes have answers to how it will be produced that don't always align with the lowest possible cost. The third question they have to answer is, for whom is it being produced? Who are we making these goods for? Who is going to receive that final product? Now, in many modern economies like the United States, the distribution of goods is determined by price. You make a good, and whoever is willing to pay the highest price for it, well, that's going to be who receives it. But that is not how it has always been. And there are some economies today that still function on a different model of resource distribution. It's not simply based upon price. Sometimes it's based upon need. Sometimes it's based upon who happens to know the people in charge. So, based upon the society's answers to these three questions, that being what is produced, who produces it, and who receives it, they'll have one of four economic systems that they're going to be able, that they will have for their nations. So they answer those questions based upon how they answer it. We know they have one of four different economic systems. Now, these systems are theoretical. No society is a pure example of any of them. However, we're going to look at all four, starting with the one that we need to deal with the least. This is a traditional economic system. In a traditional system, things are simply done the way that they've always have been in the past. An example of this might be an Inuit society. These are our Eskimos and those living in the far north of Canada. And in these systems, you tend to do whatever role in society your parents had. So, for example, if your father was a fisherman, you grew up learning about being a fisherman from your father, and you became a fisherman yourself. These societies adapt very slowly to change, and generally, these societies don't exist too much in the world today, except for in a few narrow pockets here and there. So we're going to leave the traditional system behind and talk about the command system. In a command economy, individuals have no influence on the economy. This is in that pure command system model. Remember that this doesn't really exist. But in a pure system, just a few individuals, or perhaps just one, determines the answers to all three of those questions. That is, one person decides what is produced, who produces it, and who receives the products. The former Soviet Union, this is Joseph Stalin, a leader of the former Soviet Union, was an example of a strong command economy. And the modern day example might be Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, who runs a very command economy in that nation. But outside of North Korea today, there are very few examples of nations that are anything close to a command economy. The third that we're going to talk about is your market system. We're going to refer to market systems a lot because this is the model that a lot of modern nations follow. They're not a pure market system, but a lot of nations do follow this market idea. Another name for it is called capitalism, and we're going to use that capitalism label quite a bit in this class. Now, in a pure capitalist society, governments do not interfere with individual choices. So you produce whatever you want to produce. Whoever wants to produce it is the person who produces it. And whoever wants to consume it or buy it, that's the person who buys it. It is completely up to individual choice. People are free to make whatever decisions they want on those three basic questions. The government has no say. Now, in a truly pure market system, you have some very serious problems, and you eventually wind up with just a few very super rich people who have everything that they could ever want, and everybody else is just living to serve those individuals. It doesn't work well in its purest form, which is why in the world today, most systems are a mixed system. They're a blend of market and command approaches with a heavy favoritism toward market systems. Nearly all economies in the world fall well within this range, none being pure market, none being pure command. The US is an example of a mixed system, but one which leans heavily toward a market economy. More so than most nations in the world, the United States is a market economy system. Well, that was all for today. The next time we look at a lesson, we'll be talking about the characteristics of the American economy, and specifically what makes our market a free market. Thank you very much for joining me today, and I will see you next time. Farewell.